welcome to our seminar series. It is my pleasure to welcome Basil Lourie to give a paper today. Basil is a researcher at the Mesrop Mashtots Research Institute of Ancient Manuscripts in Yerevan. He holds a PhD and a habilitation in philosophy from St. Petersburg State University. He has written extensively on theological, liturgical, and hagiographical traditions of the Christian East, with a special attention to the philosophical and logical topics in patristics, as well as to the Second Temple Jewish and early Christian liturgical calendars. Today, he'll speak to us about Saint Dionysius the Areopagite and those who knew him, what they say to us from the liturgical calendar. Basil, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you, and hello to everybody, and thank you for attending my communication. And I think I have to share my presentation now. Oh, does it work?
Okay. Yes, it does.
Perfect.
Okay, as it can see from my title, it is some kind of continuation and revisiting of my former articles on this topic since 2007 and 2010, when I tried to bring new arguments for the Petrine attribution to of Dionysius the Areopagite. Petrine, I mean to Peter the Iberian. However, now I will not touch directly the problem of authorship, but I will be very close to this problem regarding consider some discussing only calendaric and hagiographical data from the Corpus Dionysiacum. For me now, Corpus Dionysiacum is a hagiographical legend and a hagiographical document in some extent. This extent is, of course, disputable, and we can discuss it. The main questions are related to the dormition or assumption of the Theotokos. And any study in critical hagiography requires taking into account a large number of legends and other sources, because no hagiographical legend exists in isolation. Normally, it exists within a network of different legends, and especially if it was created in the midst of heteron polemics, as in our case, of course. So, I don't know how to there are two views on the hagiographical contents of Corpus Dionysiacum. The minimalist and I call it consensual view consists in the following. Corpus is a hagiographical legend and a document, at least as it deals with several apostolic figures, such as Hierotheus of Athens, Dionysius the Areopagite, Timotheus, Gaius, Sopater, or Sosipater. This name is spelled differently according to the manuscripts, John the Theologian, and Polycarp of Smyrna, Titus, and Carpus. And also in backgrounds, some other figures like Apostle Peter, Jacob the brother of Lord, and Ignatius of Antioch. But we will approach these names in the very end of this communication. It will be mostly dedicated to the Marian traditions. Only two names are mentioned which could be not those of saints. It taken apart, of course, of the pagan philosopher Apollophonus, Demophilus and Dorotheus. This name could be purely allegorical as it occurs in hagiographical legends. For instance, Demophilus could be interpreted as populist, especially this is a guess of by Michel van Esbroek, who thought that this figure pointing to Peter the Fuller. And Dorotheus, this is my own guess, the addressee of the fifth epistle about the divine darkness, divine light, could be derived from gift of God from 2 Corinthians, because this verse is referred to in the text. But other mention of saints in corpus could be not meaningless. Therefore, without understanding their meanings or the meaning of particular saint in this particular legend, we don't understand the meaning of the legend of Dionysius the Areopagite. And second view is the maximalist view, my own, and it is, of course, the most disputable. Corpus is a hagiographical legend belonging to the hagiography of the Dormition of the Theotokos. This point is vital for attribution to Peter the Iberian the core of the corpus, as well as the negation of this point is with first expression by Martin Jugy, is vital for especially Istvan Percel concept, which I consider to be the most reasonable alternative to any Petrine hypothesis. So I think that my own view has the most reasonable opponent in the views of Istvan Percel, my friend and colleague, and main opponent is in this field. Since the mid-6th century onward, at the latest, the Dormition interpretation of Corpus Dionysiacum, I mean the famous place in the divine names, became normative since the mid-6th century onward. The current discussion is about the date when the renowned saint in divine names became interpreted or reinterpreted as the apostolic gathering on the very Dormition day, when this interpretation appeared. The earliest undisputed Dormition interpretation is provided by John of Scythopolis in one of his scholia. This scholia is to be dated to either to a relatively early date, as Van Esbroek and myself proposed, 518 or 20s, or later, according to Rorem and Lamoureux. But in both cases, I think this date is too late for being taken into account when we discuss the original author's intent. Indeed, for corpus itself, the only obvious terminus ante quem is the date of a manuscript of the Syriac translation of a letter of Severus of Antioch. This date is 528, which contains a quotation from Corpus. If our, with Van Esbroek, dating of the scholion is true, it could be important as an early witness optic for genuineness for the Dormition interpretation. Nevertheless, I will prefer not to take it into account anyway, because I consider the corpus earlier than even 518, and most important that the scholion and the John himself not belonging to the same milieu as each scholiast, as a corpus. To my view, the earliest document quoting CD, Corpus Dionysiacum, is also providing a Dormition interpretation, and this is so-called Historia Efthymiaca, which I dated in my former 2007 article to the time from the early 4090s to 490s to 515. Itself, it is not a hagiographical document, but it contains some hagiographic legends. Now, 20 years later, it's time to refresh and to clarify some points of my earlier argumentation, because some new knowledge about history of Timiaka appeared since then. Strictly speaking, the Historia of Timiaka is an apology of the Council of Chalcedon, written as a historical treatise, and it aims at its aims are obvious in ecclesiastical politics. However, its author, being a historian and politician, Jewish politician, also resorts to hagiographical documents. And such interesting details concerning hagiography appeared recently in some observation of my colleague Sergei Ivanov, who works in Chicago now, renowned Byzantinist. And what we can say now about the historic Eftimiaka. In it, both Pulcheria and Evdokia are positive figures, no opposite to each other, whereas Emperor Theodosius the Younger was not so good, if not primarily responsible for the catastrophe at the end of his reign. So, for general information, I provide what fragments of History of Timiaka are now known. The first one is found in the recent edition of the Tacticon of Nikon, of Black Mountain in Antioch. And it's very interesting in fragment about Evdokia in Jerusalem, when Theodosius sent to kill two of her courtiers, and she revenged him and them, and establishing their commemoration as martyrs. Sergei Ivanov dedicated to these episodes an article in Russian. And then relatively known extract, and finally, the most important to us, the well-known fragment where Juvenal of Jerusalem quotes some transitus and divine names of Dionysius. It is known from John of Damascus, interpolated text or not. This is a bit discutable, and in fragment in a Sinai manuscript, and paraphrasing in Cephalus Callistus Xanthopoulos. I have to make a note now that the quotation from Dionysius in Historia of Timiaka is not an interpolation as Sergio Mainoldi proposed. I don't, perhaps I can skip this argumentation, but my main point is, even if indeed in the situation of Historia Ethimiaka, describe it as the empty coffin without the body, because this is a demonstration that the body of the Theotokos is received in the heaven. And the text quotes the gathering of apostles around the body of Theotokos, of dead body of Theotokos. But this is not means that this is necessarily an interpolation, because the because the same very apostles who were around this dead bed of Theotokos, and those who uncovered the coffin. And so this quotation is perfectly at place. And so I think that Pace minority, the Historia of Timiaca concerns our interpretation of Dionysius the Areopagite. Then we can discuss very briefly two competing legends of Maria Westmans and Blacherne. The legend about the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Juvenal, is known to us from the fragment of Historia Eftimiaca, and another legend of the patricians Galbius and Candidus became the official version of Constantinople since the late 5th century onwards, even after the restoration of Chalcedonism under Justin I. According to Historia of Timiaca, the legend is the following. At the Council of Chalcedon, the emperors Marcian and Pulcheria asked Juvenal, Patriarch of Jerusalem, to send to Constantinople the body of the Theotokos. He answered, quoting some Transitus legend, explaining why there is no body, but there are some funeral vestments in the church of Gethsemane, which he then will send to the capital. I will demonstrate a bit later below that this legend has a perfect historical ground. The alternative legend of Galbius and Candidus is quite different. This is quite fictitious story, which became the official under Zenon or Anastasius emperors and remained accepted after the Chalcedon restoration under Justin. The vestments, according to this legend, is no longer funeral, but ordinary. Mariam bequeathed it to her Jewish relatives, and it passed down through inheritance until it reached a Jewish old woman in Palestine, where patricians Galbius and Candidus stole it. Very often, the old woman died of grief, and this story was represented not only in texts, but also in mosaic within the Soros, the chapel near the Blacherne church, constructed for the Marian relic. Two incompatible relics explaining the origin and the nature of the Westman relic of Maria in Blacherne. In my earlier article, I argued that the legend of Galbius and Candidus is not only pure fantasy, as many scholars said before me, but also a satire against Pulcheria, an old woman who died on an unknown date of July of 453, almost immediately after the Marian relic reached Constantinople, and who, according to the opponent, introduced a Jewish doctrine at the Council of Chalcedon. According to the opponent of Chalcedon, its doctrine was Jewish. It was a topic of some satiric work. Galbius and Candidus legend was promoted as a part of the measures aimed at concealing the memory of Council of Chalcedon in the vein of the Henoticon by Emperor Zeno, and this reshaped cult. The Blacherne dress of the Theotokos was no longer a burial, but no specific connection to the Dormition, and therefore to Pulcheria and the Council of Chalcedon. So this replacing of legend led to several any links to the Council of Chalcedon and to the Empress Pulcheria. The Chalcedonian restoration under Justine did not cancel this legend. Possibly it was not. It would require the demolition of the Soros chapel, but simply reinterpreted into the in the new context where the memory of Pulcheria was perfectly rehabilitated, and the formerly anti-Chalcedonian legend became anti-Jewish. History Ethimiaca, therefore, will be impossible as an apology of Chalcedon in the atmosphere of the 518 restoration, but quite fitting with the situation of the Patriarch Euthymius, deposed for his pro-Chalcedonian sympathies. But he was still under the Henoticon of Zeno, not in communion with Rome. So a bit more about the events which are relevant now. This one will be impossible to discuss in details. It is in my some data are provided in my early articles. The prerequisite of the events we are interested in is the establishment of the very Dormition feast in Gethsemane in its earliest form. Its earliest form was Triduum from 7 to 9 August. I think it was a cult alternative to the Marian cult already established in Ephesus. But this point is also controversial. And what is important, this Gethsemane cult was in the vein of the church policy of these years, when it was in large extent defined by the competition between Ephesus and Constantinople as ecclesiastical centers. And Jerusalem was a tool of Constantinople in this way. Then the situation we are directly interested in. Juvenal of Jerusalem was present at the Council of Chalcedon and certainly met Emperors Pulcheria and Marcian. This is no problem. And this is the initial point of the plot of the legend, where Pulcheria and Marcian asked Juvenal to bring Constantinople funeral vestments to the Theotokos. And I mean this legend was in Constantinople, not in Palestine, deliberately destroyed, that is, replaced with the legend of Galbius and Candidus, while it's used as a source in the Historia of Ethimiaca. What means to destroy the hagiographical legend? It is impossible to simply destroy. It must be replaced with some other legend. And so some remains, some traces of earlier legends, sometimes some manuscripts quoting or preserving the early language could be preserved and obtained by now. What is the, now in more details, what is the historical core of this early legend of Juvenal? In fact, Juvenal returning in June, I think in June of 453, 15 to Jerusalem with a military force, because in Jerusalem there was anti-Chalcedonian Patriarch Theodosius, and only after this he became able to take the Imatia and Tafia, as said Historia Efthymiaca, the funeral vestments, from Gethsemane to Blacherne. And in this situation, the competition between Ephesus and Constantinople and Chalcedon transformed into religious war. And it was vital to create in Constantinople an accessible grave of the Virgin, even though without her body, instead of the inaccessible grave allegedly containing her body in Ephesus. We will discuss this Ephesus legend later. What is why we have to believe in principle reliability, historical reliability of this legend, because it is corroborated with I think, three anti-Chalcedonian sources. One of them is known relatively long ago, already Michel van Mesrop pointed to it, the panegyrical of Macarius of Pskov by Pseudo Dioscorus in the 7th century. It confirmed historicity of juvenile military assault to Gethsemane. Of course, maybe a number of dead bodies and amount of blood shed is exaggerated, but the very fact of military assault not only on Jerusalem but also Gethsemane is confirmed. And moreover, there are two transitus in Coptic. One ascribed to Evodius of Rome, the first half of 6th, maybe mid-6th century, and another one in the Paris manuscript fragmentary, where it's explained why there is no in the coffin of Theotokos of her vestments, because just before her, according to this transitus, and only them, just before the death of Theotokos, Christ appeared and gave from heaven some heavenly vestments for her body, and then he was assumed into heaven with these vestments, and so there is absolutely nothing in the coffin. These legends are certainly explains why there is no vestments of Theotokos, and of course this is against the vestments shown by the Chalcedonians in Constantinople. It is also interesting that the separate chapel for this Marian relic in Constantinople was called soros, which means coffin, something burial, whereas in the next legend of Galbius and Candidus, there is nothing suitable for soros. This is a remain of early legend. I omit some important maybe, but I have no time to elaborate on some calendrical dates exact of this change. Then, under Henoticon of Zeno, a new legend appeared, and any link with Gethsemane and Chalcedon and Pulcheria was interrupted. What was after the restoration by Justine I? In fact, a Neo-Chalcedonian reinterpretation of Chalcedon rather than a restoration. In theology, we can say that Neo-Chalcedonism was almost the same as the Christology of Henoticon. but Henoticon as a document itself, already interpreted under Anastasius in anti-Chalcedonian sense, was abrogated, and but the legend about the relic of Theotokos in Blacherne remained the same and became official and known to everybody. This is one important to us conclusion follows from the above. In under Justine or Justinian, it was meaningless to write such apology as Historia Efthymiaca, because the official version about this relics was the reinterpreted legend of Galbus and Candidus. And so if we have different legend and certainly historical one, the most historical, as a legend could be historical, this is certainly the mark, a mark of previous epoch when, and so my conclusion that the author was Patriarch Efthymius of Constantinople, and his name Efthymius was his not Ephemius, was the original form of his name, witnessed by the contemporaneous Vita Antiquior of Genealogy Stellae. So this is important for dating of this witness, the Historia Efthymiaca, to the same epoch as we now date the Corpus Dionysiacum. This was like already discussed, but another point important is connected to the proliferation of Marian feasts. This is the very important trait of the Palestine calendar of the second half of the 5th century. For us, the most important is only the entry of Theotokos into the temple fest, the so-called presentation. And its Jerusalem date, November 21, falls on the 98th day after August 15, which means that it is a Pentecost after the Dormition. August 15 became the date of Dormition in Jerusalem in the maybe in the middle of the second half of the 5th century. Such a counting is quite meaningful, given that the Second Temple, there were festal Pentecontades after the autumn festival, Yom Kippur and Sukkot. And there was an understanding of Dormition as Pascha, and another Pascha testified to my knowledge in the early 7th century by Coptic Patriarch Benjamin, but perhaps going back to much earlier period. Then the commemoration of Dionysius the Areopagite on October 3 is the day of the first Pentecost after the Dormition on August 15, and the second Pentecost, also important date, 15th century, when the second Pentecost after the Easter was celebrated at the Feast of Apostles. Before the and the second Pentecost is the Feast of Presentation. Several words about the development of the Feast of Presentation. In the first half of the 5th century, there was a feast of dedication of the altar, or maybe altars, in Jerusalem, which has no fixed date, but celebrated on the Sunday closest to November 25, understood as Kislev 25, the date of Hanukkah. Then appeared a feast of presentation on November 29. which is now present in Coptic and Ethiopic calendars. I think this is a fixed Julian date may be introduced in specific circumstances of 487 by Patriarch Sallustius. And then we see a shift of this date to November 21. And this is the work of Patriarch Elias. We know it from the following. In 543, the feast of on November 21 was established by Justinian for the whole empire after the consecration of the great church of so-called Nea on the slope of Mount Sion. The dedication took place on November 20. Which was projected as was demonstrated by Sarah Graham as a new temple of Jerusalem, an alleged place of the very place of this temple on the Mount of Sion, according to the views of epoch, and of course, presentation was in this place. But Justinian's Nea was not his initiative. It completed an unfinished project of pro-Chalcedonian, but still loyal to the Henoticon Patriarch of Jerusalem, Elias, contemporaneous of Efthymius. And thus, Justinian made universal the local Palestinian but pro-Chalcedonian feast of November 21. And it is also reasonable to attribute to Elias establishing of the commemoration of Dionysius on October 3, because it is almost impossible to imagine that such date for the presentation feast and this date of Dionysius on the first Pentecontat and then on the second Pentecontat, the feast of presentation would be by accident. So Elias of Jerusalem and Efthymius of Constantinople were acting in the same vein to take Dionysius for the Chalcedonian Orthodoxy. And now several words about the Ephesus Dormition legend. The legend is the following. Maria died in the house of John of the theologian in Ephesus and was buried by him, according to her will, in an unknown place. So there is no place, no relics, but she was buried in ordinary manner. Mimuni and Shoemaker, while on different grounds, of course, consider this legend as later, while Mesrop considered it to be early. Its early attestation before and beside Michael the Syrian and George Bar Hebraeus, one manuscript about the fate of apostles dated to 874, but according to Van Esbroek, going back to Jacob of Edessa to the 7th century, and the story is referred by Moses Bar Kepha, and it will be I would add a Slavonic fragmentary text from a monothelite florilegium with for the 7th century, also is pseudo-Dionysiac tradition. So I think the following picture of competition between Constantinople and Ephesus is affecting and involving the Marian cult. And of course, the Council of Constantinople of 381, no specific connection to the Marian cults. Then First Council of Ephesus, the council defending the Theotokos gathered in the Church of Maria, which is not quite usual to have a Church of Maria in so early period. And then Second Council of Ephesus, so-called Latrocinium, triumph of Ephesus over Constantinople, appropriation of the Palestinian cult by Ephesus, implying subsequent gradual replacing of the local Marian cult. Subsequent, because there is the first law of Baustark of organic development in liturgy. What is important in the Second Council of Ephesus? It changed the previous custom to open to gather council on the feast of Pentecost, and was opened on August 8th. August 8th, according to the contemporaries, transitus and calendrical traditions, is the day of gathering of apostles before the dormition of the Theotokos, before their deathbed. The later I can skip because more or less understandable. In the time of Henoticon, pro and anti-Chalcedonians in communion but without the Chalcedon. Pro-Chalcedonians seems not referring to the intermediary of Ephesus, and especially and the office of Constantinople, while not pro-Chalcedonian, also don't refer to Ephesus. The legend of Galbus and Candidus does not refer to it either. Anti-Chalcedonian, a new wave of reference to Ephesus, and especially the new preface to the Transitus in 6 books in Syriac. And there is a very good relatively recent article of by Adrian Pirce about this. Sinaitic monks, anti-Chalcedonians, of course, looks for a book describing the dormition of the Theotokos, and they receive it through the revelation of John the Theologian during the incubatio, curative dream, in the Basilica of St. John in Ephesus. And the book itself appeared from the grave of St. John. And something, the similar picture we have in the Dionysius corpus. John the Theologian, the addressee of the Epistle 10, and the very latest word of the whole corpus, established a link between John the Theologian and Ephesus. This epistle is addressed to him in the jail in Patmos, but it finished by prophecy about his liberation, and he will return to the Adriatic coast, and that is in Ephesus. Timotheus, the main addressee of Dionysius' long treatises, the second bishop of Ephesus and Dionysius' pair, Gaius, who will be the third bishop of Ephesus, but in the future he is younger than Dionysius. Polycarp of Smyrna, another John's disciple, another Dionysius pair. And finally, Sopater or Sosipater is certainly a personage mentioned in the Romans, in the Apostle Paul's epistle to the Romans. He was a Gaius companion. So all this circle of John the Theologian is points to John the Theologian and to Ephesus, like the preface of 6 books. And finally, we can say that this is still within the framework of the Henoticon. And and this pseudonymization belongs to an anti-Chalcedonian milieu, and several other conclusions. What is more interesting, why Titus and Carpus are reacting a period. Titus is well known throughout the ecumene, the apostle of Crete, but Carpus too, but only according to ancient Cretan tradition, and which we have in old Cretan pre-Arabic hymnography such words where Titus and Carpus acting both in Cretus. But why Cyprus? So Titus and Carpus points to Cyprus. But why Cyprus? This is most interesting. I finish with this constatation that in the very close circle of Peter the Iberian, there were Urbicia and her brother Ephrasius, and and with them Epiphanius of former bishop of Magdala, who were uh, 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 who were very formerly the inhabitants of Crete and recollected their spiritual father Timotheus the Cretan, and so in Mayuma was some Cretan colony exactly in the place where lived and died Peter the Iberian. Thank you for your attention, and my apologies for such um, so, for such inorderate communication. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Basil. That was a very rich presentation, and we have loads of cards on it. As you can see, there are loads of applause emojis all around. Please, if you have any questions from the audience, you can raise your hand using the icon or just raise your hand and I'll try to see you, or you can write your question in the chat. To begin with, Basil, if I may, you had a slide that you had to go over really quickly on the relationship between the Historia Euthymiaca and the Dionysian corpus. Could you say a few words about that, please?
Pardon, what do you mean about the history of Euthymiaca?
And its relationship to the Dionysian corpus.
This Historia is contain a direct quotation from the divine names, exactly enumerating the apostles who were staying around the deathbed of Maria, and so in the relevant fragment of Historia Euthymiaca, allegedly Juvenal paraphrase some kind of transitus. It is another problem, which exactly transitus. And then he adds this quotation explicitly naming Dionysius the Areopagite to explain who exactly was present before the deathbed of Theotokos, who was the whole story of Dormition. But he said the story of opening the empty coffin, and he used the list provided by Dionysius to explain who was present at this moment. A list of Dionysius was for different moments around the deathbed.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Really appreciate it. I see that Dan has a question. Dan, would you like to ask a question?
Let me find the button first. Thanks so much. This is a very interesting case where you could trace how a debate created and changed a couple of things in liturgy and in the literature surrounding them, with narratives that appear because of that and others that are how did you call them, destroyed in the process or rewritten. I'm interested in the move of calendar that you mentioned from July to November. Could you?
Yes. I skipped this part of my communication. Indeed, the earliest form of the legend of Galbus and Candidus was provided a different date of the vestment for this relics, not in July as we now commemorate, but some date in November, without pointing out the exact day of November. It is almost certainly must be the day of presentation. And so probably it was in mind originally reorientated from the Dormition to the presentation. However, the July 2 is also interesting date, because this is the date of Jerusalem feast of the Ark of Alliance, and so in some transitus, Theotokos is a new Ark of Alliance, of new alliance, and so it is natural to establish new Marian feast on this date. And this is in fact, this is a relatively complicated problem, because also on this day we have a commemoration of Juvenal and a related date of Pulcheria. For Pulcheria and for Juvenal, we don't know the exact dates of their death, which is not normal for such persons, even for empress. But I think this is because of some commemorations related to accepting them as saints by Chalcedonians. But then this tradition was interrupted in the epoch of Henoticon, and so this is. I hope to explain everything in this note, but this certainly is a different article about this. Thank you for your question anyway.
I'm also curious, just to follow it up, how often does this happen? So we know of changes of calendar, a day or two or three. How this skips 6 months. Is it common in around that time? Do you know other examples where the date of commemoration changes this drastically half a year, or this is really standing out? I'm just curious.
It's the earliest. It is not in some cases it could be relatively easy, because most probably the original date of the relics of the vestments of Theotokos in Constantinople was the very day of Dormition, and so it can be shifted to another already great feast, such as presentation, and then we can they will be able to establish a completely new feast on July 2.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Daniel. So there's a question from yours, please.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can hear me and we have no echo. My question is as to the feast of the Theotokos on 15th of August, which you mentioned briefly. Did I get you right that you esteem that the date was first conceived in the second half of the 5th century?
The date of Dormition, but because the feast of Theotokos on the 15th August was established no later than the first half of the 5th century, as you know from Armenian documents.
Yes, that's why I'm asking.
Quite different feast of Theotokos, the same, but this was a part of nativity cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And so it is a great feast already in the time of already in the early 5th century. Yes. But then in the second half, the relief, the situation in Jerusalem was defined by the mutual attraction of Dormition of August 9 and this old feast on 15 August.
Yeah.
And in this resulted in establishing new Dormition, and this was also influenced by Ephesus tradition. But this is more complicated for explained now.
Yeah. Yes, thank you.
Caroline, please.
Yeah. So thank you.
Yeah.
When you come here and speak.
Echo.
So I'm sorry because we share the same office and
it's better. It's better. It's more better.
Yeah, thank you very much, Father Basil. That was very, very interesting. As you know, I do not really believe that the feast of Dionysius was very ancient, and that the date of the 3 October is because of the cycle of Maria. I rather believe that there was no cult of Dionysius before the 8th century, and that the date of the 3 October is because of the date of the Latin Dionysius on the 7th of October, because we don't have any evidence of a cult of Dionysius and of a date of Dionysius on the 3rd October. Even in the Vita of Michael Synkelos, there is no date.
Yes, but it's the date of Jerusalem, and so I think Jerusalem documents could be they are relatively late. I mean, especially Georgian documents, of course, you know, but this is only terminus antequem. But to define the date, we have some comparative liturgy, studies in comparative liturgy. And if we have a relatively certain date for November 21, and then we have in the middle, exactly in the middle, October 3, it was hardly possible that this is not a part of the same same plan, especially because it is not only exact middle, but first Pentecost and then second Pentecost. It was quite quite familiar method of appointing liturgical commemoration to create some Pentecost periods before the 6th century, not later. And if we have between Dormition and Dionysius commemoration exactly one Pentecontad, it points to for me it points certainly to pre-Arabic time. Pre-Arabic time. And if we consider the whole picture, including the Marian feast in November, I think it must be a part of the same building created by Patriarch Elias.
Yeah, thank you.
Of course, it is normal in our liturgical reconstruction go far beyond the date of manuscripts because our manuscripts are always later.
Yeah, I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. We have a question, please go ahead.
I don't hear some problem with hearing.
He invited me to ask.
There's no problem.
Catch that. Just to close the conversation, I'm very curious in the how should we see the network around Dionysius as you presented it, the circle of Dionysius or of John. How should we see that? I also see it elsewhere. So we get these figures of early Christianity linked to their main apostle often, but when you see lateral links as well between, Ignatius writes to Polycarp, we get letters from Clement to whatnot. And but in the case of Dionysius, these letters at the end, they just have the title. Like we don't try to sell in a letter to Polycarp in any other way in terms of content. Was that, in your view, by convention, or was it, just I have a little more thing to say. I'm going to place it as one of the 10 letters and might as well put it to Polycarp? Or is it part of a very intended program to create
yes,
a network?
yes. In my present communication, I carefully avoided almost all reference to the problem of authorship of this corpus, And if we continue to avoid this problem, then I will answer that indeed we have hagiographical legend where every otherwise known saint must be used as a specific link, as a hyperlink to some universe of hagiographical legends, and so we have to become able to use this hyperlink for understanding. And so this Johannine circle around the Dionysius the Areopagite is, to my opinion, is some deliberate program. But of course, is it not to say that everybody is a pseudonym of some historical figure? I don't think that. So even if we consider the hypothesis of Peter the Iberian, even in this case, this is not to say that everybody must have some prototype. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, Basil. Thank you to all of you for joining us this morning. We'll have to wrap up this session, but please do look forward to a recording of the session going up on our YouTube page at some point in this week, as well as please do come back and join us next month for our talk. Basil, thank you so much for taking out the time to be with us this morning and sharing your knowledge. So until next month then, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your patience and attention. Thank you very much. Bye.
Thank you.